Those Space People, a podcast series of casual cosmic conversations with people working on exciting space projects. Today we have Ian Stammers with us. He is the head of RPO services and workforce solutions at Sapienza Consulting. Ian has a background in recruiting and he has previously worked with several recruitment companies. And Ian is currently based in Brighton, the UK. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Rashana. Thank you for inviting us.
First of all, can you talk about what RPO services is?
RPO it stands for Recruitment Process Outsourcing. Um, you'll probably hear more and more about RPOs or outsourcing as time goes on, because recruitment nowadays is getting so much tougher for companies around the world, especially within our industry. So recruitment process outsourcing is just when a company can outsource either some of their positions for a specific project, or they can outsource the whole recruitment. And when we act as an extension of their HR department, so we can work with their HRDs or CHROs and go through the talent strategy, what they need to do for the following year or 2 years, and then we work closely to take away all the headache from them in terms of recruitment, and then they just outsource it to us. So we act as an extension of the HR department ultimately. But yeah, in terms of outsourcing, you'll see a lot more of this RPO banded around within the industry for sure.
Yeah, it's a tedious process. Completely agree. So, how does talent acquisition, or does it not, work differently in space versus other industries? Because you worked with a lot of diverse recruitment companies in the past, so probably you could throw some light on it.
Yeah, I mean, when I started in recruitment, I was faxing CVs to people. Shows my age. Thankfully, we don't do that anymore, which is good. But in my opinion, if you're a good recruiter, you should be able to recruit for any industry. I would say, but there are differences between sort of our industry and others. I mean, for example, with myself, over the last 15 years, I've been growing my network across the globe within sort of space. So, made lots of friends, placed hundreds of people, but you can never stop, expanding on your network. The skill set is changing, the demand is changing all the time. So you've got to be really on top of your game to keep up with the industry. Um, you know, for my side as head of talent, I'm responsible to make sure that we deliver not just into Sapienza, but also into our customers. So you need to be on top of the strategy. How can you work more closely with sort of your marketing team as such? What you can do to attract certain profiles that are hard to source. You've just got to be on top of the game all the time. I mean, we're actually quite fortunate that we're in this industry that's seen record investment even through a pandemic. I do feel sorry for some of the other industries that have been hit, the travel, hospitality, tourism, and so forth. But yeah, the industry is, the technology is always changing. So you have to be really on top of your game and know, okay, the new technologies that are coming out, try and get ahead of the game to build those pipeline to source these candidates with limited skills, that has those skills, but it's a limited amount of them. And that's the only way, you can't just stand still and think, okay, that's it. So it is tough, but you have to be on top of your game always.
Wow, I never knew. It's so very insightful because as somebody working in a tech or for an engineer, I would imagine them to have to be on top of the game, but for the recruiters as well to catch up. This is
Yeah, I mean, if you look at kind of, I suppose, if you look at investors, many years ago, it used to be quite hard. Well, it was hard to raise money. Now, raising money is a lot easier than what it used to be. The hardest part, if you ask any founder, is recruitment. That is the toughest part. It's okay. Most companies come to us when they've gone through a Series A or B round. They've got the capital there. It's like, okay, we need 100 people now. And it's like, okay. So, the growth is, it's just the demand is so big right now. But yeah, ask any founder, recruitment's the toughest part for them because there's so many more companies that are around nowadays. As a candidate, you know, you've got unlimited, companies that you can choose from. There's salaries going all over the place, and yeah, a lot of other companies are kind of struggling to keep up with these kind of new ventures.
Yeah, I completely agree. A lot of my friends who are entrepreneurs also struggle with this quite a lot. I'm pretty sure that one of the worst things that can happen to a company or a startup in the growth phase is hiring the wrong people for the job.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important. If you get the hiring strategy wrong, that's the whole company. You might have an amazing product, go-to-market strategy is right, but if you don't have the right people, you you've got to get it right, and a lot of times you can only afford to get it wrong once or so, and so it is critical to get the right people on board, and have the right culture. Okay, it's great to have a good brand and everything, but yeah, and especially now with obviously pandemic, a lot of people can't go and travel. They can't go and see an office. They can't see colleagues where they would normally tend to work. The environment. So yeah, it's challenging times.
How do you find people in the first place? And also important, interesting to me is how do you keep track of their talent trajectory, right? Because a person is always evolving, learning new technologies and new skill set.
How do we find people? I can't give away too many secrets, but generally, one is, as I mentioned before, having that network. You've got to be on top of your network constantly. I mean, it's taken me, say, 15 years within sort of satcom space, to have my network. So that will only go so far. Um, we have our own, we've been involved, Sapienza, 25 years within the space industry. We have our database that goes back about 20 years. So, we have tens of thousands of candidates that are just specific to predominantly European space sector. Um, but, we utilize that. You need to, as a recruiter, know kind of who the main players are. You need to know every segment of the industry. Which companies are good, i.e., which candidates are good to headhunt from which companies, because obviously they've got a good reputation and so forth. But as a recruiter, you really need to know uh, where it is you can source not just like a space system engineer or something. you know, Now it's quite more specific. For example, if a company comes to Sapienza, wants to outsource a load of positions, they need a digital and flexible payload engineer, for example. As a recruiter, you need to know exactly which companies you can go to get that person. A lot of times we're not competing with other agencies because we have the RPO, which is great. But, for agencies that are working in the contingency world, you're competing. So you've got to be quick to find these people before your competitor does. So yeah, it's just industry knowledge, building a pipeline of candidates. A lot of our customers, we go through the headcount for the whole year, and then we start recruiting the people that they need in 6 months' time. But we don't do it now. We make pipeline of candidates, so we know as soon as they give us a green light in 6 months' time, we've already got the candidates ready for them. So the recruitment process is a lot shorter, rather than wait until 6 months and then it takes another 3 months or however long to recruit those people. So yeah, just making sure that you're on top of everything, in that what the new trends are in terms of the skill set that's coming through. At the moment we're seeing a big demand in cloud computing, DevOps. Everyone wants front and back end engineers, Earth observation scientists, and so forth. So you think, okay, right, let's make sure we have someone in the background that can just build up all of these pipeline of candidates. So when customers come to us and say we need X, Y, and Z, we've already got it there.
Yeah, that's makes a lot of sense because most companies do panic hiring, is what I feel that, and
Yeah,
everybody, so they interview a new candidate and then they ask, okay, can you start yesterday?
exactly. I mean, this usually happens. A company will win a new project, for example, or say one of the hardware manufacturers will win. They're going to design or two big satellites for, I know, one of the operators. Oh, we've won this, right? We need a load of more people. But this is kind of good where the RPO comes in, because people can outsource for like 6 months for a certain program. So if they don't have the capability in-house to recruit those people, they can just outsource, and then that's taking the headache away. They don't need to hire people internally to then recruit these people. Yeah.
Yeah, that absolutely makes a lot of sense. How is recruitment different? Because you recruit for a lot of companies across the value chain. How is it different for, let's say, upstream companies or downstream companies, or let's say new space and established space, the mature players? Of course, there's probably a difference in terms of skill set, but in additionally, is there anything else?
If we, I mean, if we look at the, not-for-profit space agencies, the old traditional space, and we take that compared to new space, it's two completely different worlds from a recruitment point of view. You look at the old, if someone wants to work for a prestigious space agency, the recruitment can take 6, 7, 8 months from date of application to onboarding. So, as you know, as a applicant, you need to know, okay, you've got to be patient. This is how it works. But the reward is, if you do get the job, you'll be working for ESA, NASA, USPA, whoever it is. So the reward is at the end of it. But it's not like new space where it's boom, 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 and you can get hired within a couple of weeks. The other qualifications within traditional space gain much more weight than they would within new space. ESA always want master's, PhD. New space, not so often. So there is that difference there between the two. In terms of upstream, downstream, if we look at space now to what it was, say, 10 years ago, it's so much more accessible. So we're seeing a lot more activity with downstream applications. Obviously we work with ESA and EUMETSAT, but we also work with many private Earth observation, remote sensing companies around the world who provide fantastic data for the end user. All of these companies want big return on investment. So we're seeing, as I mentioned, a big increase in recruitment for EO data scientists, data engineers, back-end, front-end engineers, and so forth, or generally anyone that has kind of computer vision, machine learning background.
Okay, that's interesting. At what level do you usually recruit or headhunt?
We don't really kind of get there on sort of the graduate level. We help guide graduates and so forth, but really it's mid to um, CXO level. So, in the last few years, we've placed CFOs, CTOs, MDs, CCOs all around the world within sort of satellite operators, smaller SMEs within sort of new space. We work with private equity organizations as well. But yeah, predominantly mid to senior level, and that's globally. And that's also across commercial roles and space systems engineering, software engineering, and so forth.
If I may ask, could you give any statistics or just a ballpark numbers on this?
I'd say probably say 70% of people are mid to senior level in terms of engineers, um, and the rest at C level.
Okay, interesting. And about, I don't know, 100 people per year or 1,000 people or.
I don't have the exact figures. I mean, as a company, we work on well over 500 positions a year. We have different framework agreements with the agencies, EU institutions, new space companies, and so forth. I can get that figure after, but for now, I don't have it. But we, as a team, work on way over 500 roles a year, and that's at the moment we're only working on retained work. We get inundated all the time with requests. Can you recruit here? Can we recruit here? The biggest challenge for me as head of talent is finding really good recruiters that we can then obviously take in more work and more work. So the demand is out there. It's just finding good recruiters that will help you deliver all the future work.
How do you evaluate the talent you find?
Um, Good question. We're slightly different to a recruitment agency because, I think you met my colleagues in Bremen,
Yeah.
who work on the space software called Eclipse. So, we have our own team of developers. So we have people like, ESA, um, OHB, Airbus that use the space software. So we have a team of developers that sit in the Netherlands. We also have a team that are in North Macedonia. I'm actually building out a recruitment team that are in North Macedonia, and the recruiters, because a lot of the work that we recruit now is software development. Our recruiters actually, they first will interview a candidate for 45 minutes, and then what they would do as a secondary action, they will sit down with the software developers and go through the CV before we actually send it to a customer. So we have that capability to really evaluate CVs before we send them across, which is why our CV to interview ratio is really high. So we evaluate doing that way. Of course, we have a long history of placing people within the industry. So if we look at, we use Bullhorn as our ATS system, we can go on there and there's pipeline of candidates for pretty much most roles within the industry of people we've placed 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 2 years ago. So we have, you know, we try and star them as much as we can. Some people go out on 3-year contracts, some, are permanent, but we're always kind of the first people to know who's going to be available. They're finishing a contract, or generally they just want a change of career. Because of our heritage, we're kind of like a first point of call. And over the years, you built up all of those that network you have. So it makes it a lot easier. Kind of someone comes to me and says, for example, as I mentioned earlier, they need a payload engineer. I've placed dozens and dozens of payload engineers, so I can easily just pick up the phone, probably on my mobile, and go, okay, I'll call this person. So sometimes it's easy as that. Sometimes it's really hard. I mean, for some positions, we have to speak to over 200 candidates to fill one position,
Wow.
which is, this is why we provide statement of works with the RPO customers. Every month we'll send them a list of how many people that we've spoken to, so their job title, name, location, everything. And some HR directors are shocked. They're like, you have to speak to that many people to fill one position. And this is generally because, the last few years we've had a pandemic. We see a lot more loyalty from employees now. They don't want to change jobs because they feel loyal to the company. They can't travel. That's been a big issue. So we need to speak to more and more candidates to kind of source those hard positions.
Do you see more remote jobs being created or more on site roles turned into remote positions?
Yeah, I wouldn't say fully remote. Hybrid is probably the norm right now. I mean, if you look at the UK, for example, just now, I think it's been announced that we're work from home if we can. But generally, most of the companies that we work with, if it's a commercial role, remote is usually okay. And that's wherever you are around the world, whether it's our Canadian clients, people in Japan, or wherever. Remote for commercial roles is usually okay. A lot of the new ventures like to have people in the office because it creates that new buzz, the energy that they need if they're in a startup. For example, one of the startups that we work with in London, they like to have their people in there at least a couple of days a week, because that really helps. If you start a new company, you haven't met anyone, only online through Teams or Zoom or whatever platform you use. That's great, but it doesn't show you the whole company. So, from my point of view, if you can have hybrid working moving forward, that's probably the best way. I miss going into an office all the time, from a recruitment point of view, because you don't get to see your team. You see your team, more or less every day on Teams. But yeah, I would say generally across the industry, certainly with the clients that we work with, hybrid's probably the norm now. but it seems to work. And a lot of companies save costs now on, leasing big properties in the centre of London when they don't need to. So they can put that money, invest that back into the team and into the business, which, kind of makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, hybrid also makes sense because it allows for a better work-life balance. So
Yeah. Especially nowadays with, the pandemic, it's all about, okay, make sure you do have good um, balance between work and home.
speaking of startups, I'm assuming that the established or the traditional companies, they probably take your help in recruiting all the time. But speaking of startups, at what size do they usually approach you? Because as far as I've seen, about I think the first 5 to 10 employees are hired based on personal network.
Yeah. Normally, I mean, we used to sit with, a few years back, used to go with, I don't know if you know, Seraphin Capital, who do, so, they have cohorts there and go there and they've got maybe, as you mentioned, half a dozen people or 10 people. And so we used to kind of sit with people like them, see what's going on and so forth, and kind of know about all of these new ventures that are potentially going to be really successful. So we kind of watch them. Sometimes we try and help them if we can, any way we can. Without we know they don't have the capital to use companies like us to recruit. But generally, when companies are leading up to a Series A, um, normally there would be about. I mean, I say we have customers at the moment that have about 15 employees and they've retained us as a new venture, and they're going to be up to maybe 200 employees over the next few years. But generally, it's normally when they're about sort of 50, and then they get a load of several hundred million or whatever it is nowadays, and then they need to scale. But generally, the RPOs that we work on, they tend to be from about sort of 20 people over a course of a year to sort of 80 or so hires that they need to do.
Do you think recruitment works differently in space sector versus other industries? Because space is small, right? The number of people are small, so it's easier to have a strong network.
Easier to have a stronger network, but now it's harder to find these people because there's so many new companies that, I think last year record investment was about 8 billion US dollars in the industry. So if you look at those sort of figures and you think, well, all these companies obviously they need to hire people, hundreds of people or thousands, obviously between them. But where are we suddenly going to get all those people from? So, it all starts from, in the school classroom, get the kids involved and so forth. And let's try and bring the next generation of space engineers coming through. But it is a lot tougher now. We need to speak to a lot more candidates because the candidate pool is getting smaller, and obviously um, the candidates have more choice. There's so many more companies that they can go to right now, and a lot of these companies are throwing all sorts of money to people with, say, 2 or 3 years experience. Some are earning six-figure salaries, and it's like, wow, okay, an SME can't keep up with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand because if I guess we just need to compare, I don't know, the salaries between Google versus SpaceX. Of course, SpaceX is many time a sexier, a cooler, an awesomer place to work. But yeah, if you look at the financials, the pure financials of it, yeah, of course, there's a big difference.
Yeah, I mean these SMEs can't afford to try and compete with, for example, in the UK we've got people like isotropic systems who are fantastic, doing fantastically well with multi-beam antenna, it accelerate, the space industry, and companies like that we need 100%, but smaller companies can't compete with those sort of companies. So they need to then rethink their talent strategy and think, okay, we can't just chuck money at salaries because that's not going to work. So they have to think of other USPs. Okay, where do we get these people from? How do we attract them? What can we give differently that other companies don't do? And we're seeing more and more of these sort of added benefits, which don't necessarily cost anything to the company. A day off for your birthday, for example, little things like this, and other, as an example, other things that they need to kind of think. But the talent strategy now is so much harder for companies now, because they can't just say, okay, come and work for us, post an advert, and people are going to apply. Unless you're, like you rightly said, you're an Amazon or SpaceX or Google, whoever, no one's going to apply for your jobs. Frankly, you will get people who apply, but you have to go and headhunt these people. And you have to focus a lot more because there's so much more competition.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah. Do you see any glaring gaps between what the companies are looking for and what the potential employees or the workforce has to offer?
We're seeing um, more people, well, more demand for, as I mentioned, kind of DevOps people, cloud computing, front and back end engineers, EO data scientists. We're seeing a big influx of these type of people that everyone is trying to hire. Um, there isn't a great, well, there's people out there, but some of the salaries that some companies are paying, some companies can't compete. So they struggle to try and find people with that experience that they're looking for. Whereas maybe a few years ago they could find these people at their salary, at the budget, but now it's they do struggle. So I'd say mainly it's within sort of software development that's probably the biggest demand. We still have a demand for space systems engineers. That's always going to be a big demand there, but software development is probably the main sort of demand we get from our customers.
Another thing that I find I've recently found quite interesting is I was looking at a job advertisement, and then it was written in the end of the job requirements, the end of the ad, that they explicitly encourage women and underrepresented groups to apply. And they gave a very interesting statistic. They said that men often apply to jobs if they meet just 40 to 50% of the requirements, while women apply only if they meet 100%. So do you also see this happening?
I have no information on that, but it's we from our point of view. I mean, as in terms of DNI, we have I think about 35 within our company. We have about 35 different nationalities. 50% are female, male, maybe even more female than male within our company. Probably is now, but generally there's a lot of, obviously we get a lot more applications um, from male gender than we would female. But year on year, I suppose over the last couple of years, I was actually just doing an article that I'm going to post in the next few days on DNI. I think it worked out that I think it's about 48% of the people that we've placed as a company this year are female.
Oh, wow.
Now that does only touches part of DNI. You need to obviously look at other strategies. As well. But that was just one stat. But I will post this article, and it gives you a whole breakdown of the different nationalities that we've placed, different race, and so on across the different geographies. So yeah, once I've posted that, I'll let you know. But we are seeing from our side, diverse group applying for positions, but it is obviously heavily male applicants that apply.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that definitely looking forward to your post.
Yeah.
I'll check it out. And speaking of, now that you mentioned geographies, of course, most of the space activity, I would assume, is based in the US, American companies, but now there's also a lot more companies in Europe or Australia, other parts of the world. So, where do you see the most demand for work and also supply of engineers?
I mean, the US is always going to be the biggest, what's it, 60, 70% or whatever it is now. Europe, we're doing well. There are obviously companies who are doing fantastic well, like ISI, other companies, isotropic systems. We're seeing the UK space sector is thriving at the moment. We're seeing the government in the UK backing a lot more space ventures, and plowing money into there. So I would say Europe, US, Europe. From our side, we do work with companies in the Middle East, but there isn't as huge. There is some growth in the UAE, um, uh, but we don't see huge amounts. Our other customers are mainly sort of Japan, China. As a company, we don't work with, but generally we see Europe and the US as obviously the biggest segments, and there's so many companies uh, within Europe that want to be kind of the next. I don't know whether you could say SpaceX, but we want that giant company in Europe. So, but it's a fantastic industry to be in. We're lucky, and yeah, you know, it's like I say, record investment year on year, even through a pandemic. We're in a good place right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, space is is definitely the one of the coolest spaces to be because on multiple fronts it's evolving, right? Based on technology, on law, business aspects, investment. So on all
Yeah.
fronts, it's a very happening place. What skill set is needed to work in recruitment? Like, what kind of backgrounds do your colleagues come from?
Good question. I don't think anyone wakes up and says, I want to be in recruitment. People want to be a lawyer, a policeman, astronaut. No one wakes up and says, I want to be a recruiter.
Yeah.
But in terms of what you need, in terms of education, you don't need a degree. I don't have a degree. I've been in recruitment 22 years. I've been successful. So you don't need the degree. You just need the right kind of attitude, and everything can be taught. Um, you know, the people that we try and recruit are people that have a passion for the industry. People who, for example, hired a senior recruiter earlier this year. He knows more about space than I do. Absolute space geek. That's his words. That's how he describes himself. But he loves it. He wants to learn. He puts himself on EO courses and so forth. But he just has that passion for the industry. So if you have that, huge passion, you want to know how positions work. How does this work? How do those satellites go up? Launch or whatever it is to do with space. And I think once you've got that passion, uh, obviously you have to be a people person. That's why I do the job. To make someone's life better. Often they're going to get salary, better package. Sometimes most times they will relocate from one country to another. So you get that self satisfaction that you've helped someone. Obviously we get paid quite well. That also helps. But in terms of the profile that you need, you just need the right attitude. Um, in terms of anything, you've got to be able to take knockbacks and so forth. I mean, I mentioned earlier sometimes we speak to over 200 candidates to find that one candidate that we can place into the company. So you've got to be quite strong-willed, but don't just let that brush off your back. But recruitment, I mean, our recruitment team, we've got 3 people in Macedonia, the girls there, and they loved interviewing candidates. I mean, only last week they were interviewing from about 12 midday to about 7, 8 in the evening, back to back, and they were having fun with the candidates. They were really enjoying what they do, and at the same time getting fantastic CVs across to our RPO customers, who are then booking interviews straight away. So you see that side of it when you've got to enjoy talking to people. You've got to enjoy. Some people like to do the research side of it. We go onto our own system, database, do Boolean searches. We go onto LinkedIn, use Recruiter on there. So some people like to kind of like think they're police. Like, let's try and find, or detective, try and find this person. And sometimes it's like a needle in a haystack. A client says, I want one of these people, and there's about 6 in the world. It's like, left-handed astronaut or something, you know. But sometimes it's hard. But people like that kind of, to do that type of role. But yeah, you've got to enjoy what you do. You've got to enjoy working with people. And we work with different. One thing I like about the role, we're not just working in the UK. We're working with different cultures. So, speaking with our Japanese clients, speaking with our clients in the Middle East, in the US, it's really nice. And it gives you a bit more, I don't know. I mean, I lived in the Middle East for 6 years, so I loved it out there. but it's just nice to have a different, not always talking to the same type of people, if that makes any sort of sense.
Absolutely. It sounds actually quite fantastic. Sounds very good because it's the two things that you love, right? Talking to people and being in space and talking to people about space. So that's it can't get better.
Exactly. I mean, I've been recruiting in this industry for 15 years, and you're still learning every single day. You're never going to know fully what some of these technical roles do. Um, but I know now if someone gives me a job description or just gives me the title, I generally know what type of person they look for. So that's good. You kind of learn a bit more about the industry, how things are put together from someone saying, okay, I want a satellite to, okay, what's the process from, the whole life cycle of getting that satellite in production and up and launched and so forth. So yeah, I mean, 100%. I enjoy, the industry, the people, and the actual, the job.
Did you see people trying or preferring jobs which are a better culture fit? Like, for example, how important is the right culture fit for the person for the potential employee?
If you'd have asked me that maybe 5, 6 years ago, I would have said probably not very important. People were just moving for money, and that's what it was. It's just about what's the salary, yes or no. Which as a recruiter I mean, it makes our job a bit easier, but it's not nice. Um, so much more now. It's it's about the culture. You know, you, apart from your home, you're going to spend most of your time at work. So you've got to get on with the people. It has to be, the right setup. And I suppose the biggest struggle that a lot of companies are having right now is being able to portray the culture when they can only do online uh, video interviews. So a lot of our companies that we work with will do maybe 2 video interviews, and then they will offer, if they can get them into the office, they would. But a lot of times it's just with maybe someone from HR, your line manager, and maybe a C-level exec. And then, you know, it's from that, it's very hard to show the rest of the team, the business, the office, how's everything set up, how relaxed it is, or on the flip side, how it isn't relaxed. So now, from a candidate perspective, we're seeing a lot more candidates very cautious, should I say, about changing, and a lot of them aren't changing anymore as they were before. Um, so maybe that's a part of the pandemic. I don't know, but yeah, candidates are a lot more cautious now. And from my point of view, if I was to join any company, it's all about the culture.
I guess even employers are also very conscious about that because lately I've seen the culture fit part of the interview is almost as long as the technical interview.
Yeah, it has to be. I mean, the only advice I would give to employers is if you can showcase that on your website. Remember, the website is your biggest selling point. If you can have video interviews, I know isotropic systems do this because I see it and think, well done to you guys. If you can have video interviews with your different members of or different divisions of your company, you can show things as a group what you do, whether it's okay a staff party or celebrating someone's birthday. Things like one of our customers is GHGSat. They name the satellites after someone's baby within the office. Things like that. That's a really nice touch. And that again, they're a fantastic company to work with. Their culture is amazing. Everyone that we place into that company absolutely love it. So they've got it spot on. And that is purely down to the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. A picture really emphasizes the point that the company is a very family friendly place.
Exactly. Employees come first. Nowadays it's hard to, well, it's very easy, sorry, to forget about the employees because you don't see them as often because they're working remotely or, home, different country. So, it can be quite lonely as an employee. So when you do recognize, things like this, it's nice. It's a really nice touch.
Yep, absolutely. I completely agree with that. So you've given a fantastic advice to employers, recruiters. Do you have any advice for employees?
Employees. Um, it depends on what kind of area they work in, and so forth. But generally, I would say most companies are now trying to hire people within a few weeks, um, because there's so much competition out there. People are going, one interview, two interviews, right, we're going to offer because otherwise they've gone. We've had that happen so many times this year where candidates available, client says, okay, we want to interview them in 2 weeks' time. Comes 2 weeks' time, candidate's already got another job. So, that's, I suppose, a bit of advice to employers. As a candidate, there's lots of opportunities out there. Um, all I would say is make sure you research the company first. There's a lot of new ventures out there, so check their background, where they got the capital, so forth, what their future growth looks like. But like you mentioned, look at the culture. What is the setup going to be? Do you need to be on site? Is it hybrid? Whatever it is. But yeah, just research the company as much as you can. If there's a skill set, if there's, 16-year-olds listening to this, or 15-year-olds, you can do software development and get into that side of the business. You'll earn fantastic money as soon as you, you know, post grads will earn fantastic money in that sort of area. So if you can get into that, great. I know that's where I'm going to push my son.
Oh, that's the thing, right? Someone getting into programming, it's degrees are now becoming less and less of a requirement. The most of the focus is on the skill set and the projects that they worked on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's I mean, if you want to go to an agency, like ESA or someone like that, you have to, 100%, you have to obviously get the
Yeah.
masters and PhD. But new space, it's all about the skill set, and your experience more than education as such.
In the US, I feel that there's a lot more emphasis on the college or the university that people graduate from. What do you think about the rest of the world?
Not what I've seen. Not too much. I mean, it depends on what type of role. I mean, for example, I've placed kind of chief strategy officers. Now, for that, coming from Harvard or whatever it is yeah, that gains a lot more weight. But generally, most employers that we work with don't really look at the university as such. We, as recruiters, we know which universities are good. For example, in the Netherlands, you would have Delft University. Obviously, in the UK, we've got Surrey, and so forth. So you kind of know as a recruiter where good people will come from, but it's not necessarily a customer will say, we need someone who's been educated at this place. Um, but yeah, generally, I mean, we do have ITAR regulations, and the EU got regulations and so forth. Working in the space industry, a lot of times they do say, okay, it has to be a NATO country where you've been gained your degree, um, purely because obviously they're end users or end clients. But generally, you know, no one really looks at it too much. Not that I've come across anyway.
It's been a really interesting insights, Ian. If anybody listening to this podcast want to contact you, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, either via LinkedIn or through Sapienza website. But yeah, I'll connect if anyone's looking for a job or needs help with growing a company, or just some free advice on, okay, we've got this issue, how can we solve it? Then yeah, happily get in touch, and I'll connect with anyone. So, but thank you, Vishana. It's been really good to speak with you.
Yeah, it's been super fascinating insights because we never really get to hear from a recruiter's perspective. So this is really fabulous, and you made Sapienza such a fun, amazing place to work at. I'm sure you'll get a lot of applications.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your time, and thanks for being on the podcast.
You're welcome. Take care.